Hello students, today we're going to talk about file processing in Python. Files are a very powerful element of programming to study. By learning how to manipulate files, we open up a new world of possibilities using Python and programming in general. Information is stored in two different types of files that we'll be looking at independently. For the purpose of this module, we'll mostly be looking at text files, but the other kind is a binary file. A binary file represents a program executable, an image, a video, or any other complex file type. A text file represents any file that can be edited with a text editor, or which only contains character information. This includes web pages, Python programs, and INI files. It's worth noting that some things that you might think are text files, such as Word documents, are not. In fact, a Word document is a binary file because it contains non-textual information, such as font size, font color, things like that. And so if you open up a Word document in a text editor, you will actually be able to recover the text of the document, but it'll be garbled and there'll be a lot of extra stuff in there that doesn't make sense. And this is because most of the contents of, or much of the contents of that file is binary. Now again, we'll be working with text files in Python. In Python, when you want to work with a file, you must do what's called opening a file input stream, and when you're done, you must close the file input stream. Now, for our purposes, we can think of this simply as opening a file and closing a file. And we use these, or we can do this by using methods named open and close specifically. Now, the method for opening a file is simply open, and then it takes a file name and a second argument for the reading privileges of the file, or how are we opening the file? What are we going to use it for? We would then set this equal to some file variable so we could reference the result of opening the file name, and when we were done we could then say file variable.close to close the file when we're finished with it and release it for other programs to edit. Now, file names are similar to the images we used in section 3. They are strings that contain the path to the file. The path can be local, which starts in the directory your program is in, or absolute, starting with the root or drive letter on your computer. So if you're on a Windows machine, for example, this will start with most commonly the C drive and then a path to the file. Now, one quick tip: when you're working in Python, one of the things you can do if you're opening a file for read-only, you can actually use your Python program itself because it's always in the correct local directory. You just need to include the file name, and wherever your program is running at, it will start in that directory and it will always find itself. Now again, the open function has two arguments in it, and the first is the file name, and the second argument is actually opening privileges. So we can either pass in a single letter R, lowercase, for read-only, or W for write. And these are pretty self-explanatory. You pass in R if you simply want to read the contents of the file and have no intention to modify the file, or W if you want to open the file for modification. Now, one of the interesting things to note is that that this actually impacts how the file is opened and what can be done with it. If you open the file for read-only, the file remains on your hard drive and other programs can access it. If you open the file with write privileges, a lock is actually placed on the file, and if you try and open it in another editor, you'll get an error message saying the file is already in use. You won't be able to edit it in another program. For now, let's focus on read-only files. So again, to open a file, you simply use the open function. And you set this equal to a variable. So in this case, I'm creating a variable called fileref, and I'm setting that equal to the open function and passing in the path to a file. In this case, qbdata is a file that's in the same directory as the Python program I'm writing. And I'm opening it with read-only privileges, so it's read-only. When I'm finished with the file later, I'll be able to use fileref.close in order to close the file, and it will actually set the fileref variable equal to none, or the null value. Once a file is open, the simplest way to iterate through a file is with the following syntax, and that's to use the readlines function. So in this case, what readlines does is I'm creating a new variable, myFile, and then readlines actually reads the contents of the text file and stores it as a list of lines in the text file. So each line of text is stored as a single entry or a single element in the list. And I can then use a for loop to iterate through it because a list is an iterable type. There are other methods for reading a file, as well as for writing to a file. If a file has been opened with write privileges, you can actually use filevar.write, which will add a string to the end of the file. To read in from a file, you can use filevar.read, which will return the entire file as a single string. If you use filevar.readLine, it will read the next line up to and including the new line character. Or you can use readlines, which again returns every line as a list. Each of these has a specific place and purpose. Read is often used if you want to operate on an entire file at once, and we'll use an example of this later. Readline is more useful if you are working with something that uses live input and output. So for example, say you are working with another program that logs all the changes to files on your computer, and whenever you get a new line into that file, you want it to send an email to you. Well, you can write a Python program that says, read a line from this log that's dynamically being updated over time, and then send an email to me with the details of that. And so whenever a file is changed on the computer you're monitoring, you can get information about that. Readlines, again, is useful for most general purpose in Python when you want to be able to work on the individual lines independently, and is useful for things like capitalizing the beginning of every sentence in a case where that hasn't been done, or otherwise breaking down the text. Now, if we open a file with the W as the second argument, the file is opened in write mode. It's worth noting that if the file doesn't exist, it is created in this case, and so in this way we can actually create new files on the hard drive. We can then use the write function to append a string into the file. Strings are concatenated as they're given to the function, which means that that your program is responsible for all formatting, including new lines. If you want your file to not simply create a single long one-line file, you'll have to insert those new lines where they're appropriate, as paragraph breaks or for whatever purpose you need them for. Now, for a quick example of how this works, you can try this program. In this case, we're simply defining a main function, and we are asking for a file name on the command prompt. We store that in the variable file name, and then we actually create the file and say open with under read only. Now what this does is we create a reference to that file, and then we can use a for loop to iterate through each line in the file and print out that line in all uppercase characters by using the upper function. Now, since Python programs are text files, you can actually test this program by entering the name of whatever you save this file as the file name, and it will print out this exact file in all uppercase characters.